Hello and welcome to my set review of Solastere, a Magic the Gathering set by Scribble, and the next set coming into Revolution Custom Standard starting January 1st, 2026. This is a battle cruiser Magic set with significant monocolor focus and a lot of other themes, including graveyards, blink, and enchantments. So I feel right at home. I'm really looking forward to this set, and I'm not just saying that. Let's get going. But first, let's talk about what we're losing. Because in January, we will. Uh, Awakening in Uldun will be rotating out of Revolution Custom Standard, and taking with it a bunch of pretty important cards. Starting off, there's a bunch of aggro cards that are going. The biggest name is definitely Momentous Charge. This was the best combat trick in the format, and it really messed up card in its own right. That was subsidizing heroic and otherwise all-in aggressive strategies for its entire tenure. I will not miss it. Also going are Jorgen, Martyr of the Rasimar, a reasonable one-drop that saw some play, Screeching Grauku, which also saw a little bit of play in various token decks, Aspect of the End, which never had a great home, but was always kind of lurking at the edges of the format, and had some interesting interactions with various ping effects, and Yen Slopeskidder, which was the de facto best green aggressive 4-drop for quite a while. The most important card leaving the Uldun is undoubtedly Abominable Avalanche. This Gruul removal spell that got you free value out of the graveyard was a big incentive to ramp, big incentive to be red-green, um, big incentive to be a slightly bigger deck, and its absence will really hurt the red-green core. Uh, Also leaving Cassia the Carefree, kind of the default best white 4-mana mid-range play with a lot of synergies, including with all the Oblivion rings in the format, and Indomitable G-Crew, a widely played 5-drop in various kind of slower mid-range decks. Just as nearly as important are the Rough Rider, especially the white and red one. Renowned Rough Rider was definitely the best white 3-drop in the format, and the white 3-drop slot's looking a pretty slim with it gone. Audacious Rough Rider was maybe not the best red 3-drop in the format, but still widely played and had a lot of synergies with the various looting and treasure or payoffs we had all over the format. Barbarous Rough Rider, the black one, also occasionally saw play. The flashback removal, especially Final Fate, Firebolt, and Chronicle of Extinction, was a big part of kind of grindy and control-y sweeps in this format. Firebolt as a widely played red shock, Final Fate really quite an efficient removal spell if you could afford the triple black. And Chronicle Extinction, although its glory days are long behind it, did have cute Pokemon on one of its arts. There were a ton of graveyard synergies in Uldun, especially All That Remains. I'll miss All That Remains. This instant speed card filtering was kind of widely used to fill graveyards and put together combos in all sorts of graveyard-centric decks. Igneous Visions was a very potent build around in decks that could afford to have a low curve and play entirely at sorcery speed, giving very effective card disadvantage and graveyard synergy. Morbid Bloomer was a on and off again seen green 2-drop that always performed decently well. And Elrontan Visionary, although not seen much of late, was always hanging out there in the green 3-drop slot for rampy decks that played artifacts and enchantments. Those were cards that saw play across a whole bunch of archetypes. Now moving on to stuff that was like seen in a specific archetype, and therefore that archetype is pretty dead. Starting with Blue-Black Flash. Now this is a kind of a weird situation because there is actually a Blue-Green Flash archetype in Solastere, and boy, they would have loved if access to these cards. Rabur Goliath, Blind Keela, and Rabur's Appetite formed the core of a Blue-Black Flash deck that was pretty good for its entire time in the format. And with these cards gone, there's not really a reason to be Blue-Black Flash anymore. There's a whole bunch of sideboard cards that are going. Thunderous Avalanche, most importantly, was the green artifact enchantment sweeper of choice and a gnarly card. Forget Their Names was our best surgical extraction effect for combo. Crux was brought in by combo decks to deal with hate artifacts. Hardy Rough Rider with a decent life gain piece against aggro. And Sensor Tablet was one of the many graveyard hate rocks we had, occasionally seen in decks that cared about the fact that it had an activated ability. And finishing off with two archetypes that were never like top of the format, but were always around and were entirely supported by Uldun cards. First is Flashback. Blistering Cryo Phoenix was the main reason to care about Flashback specifically. It was a good payoff. And second is Ruins, Herald of Awakening and Speaker of the Forebears as the two 1-drops that really rewarded you for putting Ruins in your deck. Okay, so let's talk Solastere. Solastere is a nice breath of fresh air. It's a relatively simple set for all of its splash and color, with only 4 mechanics, of which 2 are returning. So let's start with the new mechanics. Align is what it's called on Scribble's Egg Hub, and so what we'll be calling this review, although we've already received word that it will be officially renamed to Syzygy, using the unorthodox S spelling of that word. This is a Convoke variant. You can tap creatures while casting the spell or activating its abilities to pay only for the generic part of its cost. So here we have Prism Catcher, costs 1 to green, it's a 1/3 of reach, and you can pay 1 tap to add 1 mana of any color. But here you could tap a creature to make it cost just a green, and you could tap a creature to instead of paying the 1 in that activated ability. Convoke alikes. They can. We certainly have a lot of token makers in Revolution right now, although Convoke likes do require things to be going well, and sometimes they don't. We have a new artifact token in the set in Chart Tokens. They are tokens that have 2 and sack this to reveal cards from top of your library until you hit a land card. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. The land goes into your hand. So these are kind of like a clue. You pay 2 and you get a land in your hand. You get a card in your hand. Your opponent does see it, which is slightly annoying. I think in general I'd value these at slightly under a clue. A land in hand is still a relevant piece of cardboard. That's still something you can play, so something you can discard. One thing I think I value a lot more than a lot of other players is just hitting your 5th, 6th, 7th land drop. It's just a lot of advantage to have lands in play, especially with so many mana sinks floating around the format. Solastere is a -1/-1 counter set, and there is kind of a -1/-1 counter theme across a bunch of cards. And it also has Wither. There are Wither tokens, and there are also creatures that just have Wither. Here's just Relentless Huntmaster, which is 3 mana 1/1 with Wither that make the 2/2. The Wither is not on a lot of cards that I would describe as like hugely pushed, but it's around. And the big kind of splash of the set is actually adventures. We actually already have adventures in Standard right now with Kitsuo Dusk of Time, but the adventures in Solastere all follow a similar pattern. They have a cheap adventure. I believe the maximum cost on those adventures is 3. No, there's a 4 in there somewhere, but they're mostly cheap, nearly on-rate spells. Here we have Path of Hubris as the adventure, blue-red, instant, return a spell to its owner's hand and deal 2 damage to your opponent. And all the adventures are on 7+ mana value spirit type creatures. So this is Draconos Irakis, the main part of this card, which is a 7 mana 4/7 flying with ward. These cards are really interesting to evaluate. I haven't put a ton of them on my lists because I think in general the adventures are a little too underrated, but it doesn't kind of beg the question, how much value is it to put a mediocre 7-drop like Draconos Irakis in your hands? Because Path of Hubris kind of draws you a card, but it's a mediocre 7-drop. And the answer I'd give is, it's not worth nothing. You do hit 7 mana a decent amount of the time. Not every game, maybe not even half of your games, but in a typical mid-range deck, you have 7 mana sometimes. Obviously, if you're ramping or reanimating, it's a lot more valuable to you. But even if you're not, having having access to it is not bad. I like, how much mana would I pay? How much tempo would I give up around turn 2 to draw a 7 mana creature that's not that good? Like maybe half a mana, maybe a little less than half a mana. I will say, if you're not ramping or reanimating, 7 is a lot less than 8, and 8's a lot less than 9. You hit 7 mana, I would say, like 40, 30% of the games, decently often. It's a relevant thing. 8 mana, now we're talking much less, 10, 20% of games if you're not doing anything special. 9 mana, forget about it. So let's move on to, I'm going to go through the staples, starting with lands, then Wooburgs, then gold cards, then colorless. Then I'm going to go into cards for specific decks or archetypes. Starting with a smorgasbord of lands here, there's the Nebula cycle, there are some uncommon Karoos. We already have a Karoo in Jubilant Docks. Sometimes you want a Karoo. If you are Karooing and you need some color-intensive cost of a particular color, you could play these, but I don't think they're going to move the needle much. Budding Mire is another kind of non-basic land hate card, similar to Crumbling Ruin from Twiltree. This is basically the same thing as Crumbling Ruin, except you pay an additional mana, but both you and your opponent get an additional everywhere. Um, I think you probably just want Crumbling Ruin for the times that you want it. The main thing you want this card to do is kill Heap Ludicon, um, and the manlands from Exile Twiltry, but mostly like Heap Ludicon, and Ruin does that for 1 mana cheaper. The real kind of standout in the utility lands is Wizard Waygate. This is just a common land, and it has a -1/-1 counter tapped for colorless, and it has 2 tap to put the -1/-1 counter from it onto target creature. Only the sorcery, but still, this is a land, untapped land that draws you a 3 mana removal spell. 3 mana put a -1/-1 counter on something is like not an irrelevant card to have access to. And this being untapped means if your mana is good, you can certainly afford to run this, or especially if you care about colorless mana. I could definitely see if the meta shakes up that such that there are relevant creatures with 1 toughness, sync, containment, seraph, um, stuff like that, that you want to target on turns 4+, then Wither Waygate could absolutely make its way into some mana bases. But the real headliner lands for this set are the Observatory Cycle. These are rare lands. They have basic land types, and so they all tap for a mana of 1 color. And they enter tapped if you control well, in the case of Lakufe Observatory, a non-plains land. So it's a plains, and it's tapped if you control a non-plains land, and they all have activated abilities that are pretty cheap. The white one is 3 mana, exile creature card from your graveyard, make a 1/1. The blue one is 3 mana, surveil 1. The black one is 2 mana, exile card from your opponent's graveyard, they lose 1 life. Red one is 3 mana, discard a card, draw a card. Green one is 3 mana, make a chart token. So first of all, if you're in a monocolor deck, these are just free. Like if you're in a mono white deck and every single card in your mono base is already a plains, remember that stack Conviviflex is also a plains, then this has no downsides. You should just always run 4 of them. And so that's nice. Free access to activated abilities that are sometimes relevant. That's not nothing for your monocolor payoffs. Also, the fact that these all have basic land types means they discount Welkin Eviction and the other monocolor payoffs, Damned to Hell, from Kitsuo Dusk of Time. That's important. But even if you're not mono white, I could easily see these being run all over the place, even if you accept that they're going to enter tapped. The white one, black one, and red one all are like pretty good effects, even if they were on a tap land. And bear in mind, they always enter untapped if they're your first land of the game, because you definitely don't control any other non-anything lands. These are a really big boon to monocolor decks, which already have a decent number of payoffs kind of going for them. And there's going to be a lot of more monocolor support as we start going through this set. Starting with white. The white 3-drop slot is looking a little thin. In fact, the whole white aggro suite was looking a little thin, kind of held up by Kitsune Matriarch decks. And boy, does Kitsune Matriarch get 2 new toys in this set. First off, is Radiant Pilgrim. It's a 1-mana 2/1, and whenever it attacks, if you create a token this turn, you get a 1/1 spirit token with Wither that's tapped and attacking. And you sack it at the beginning of the next end step. This is a token creation event, so it triggers Kitsune Matriarch. We have a lot of ways to make tokens, a lot. Melon is a widely played card. All of the Raise the Alarms. If you're dipping into red, which is kind of the traditional token color, you get the decoy cards. You get Sparks of a Revolution. If you do have to be triggering this reliably, I do not want to be playing a vanilla 1-mana 2/1 in this format with all of the 2/3s running around. And you don't get to keep the token. But the kind of tokens based deck now has another good 1-drop, which is really something it needed critical mass of. Another 1-drop in this set is Void Prelate. This is a 1-mana 2/2, but it enters with a -1/-1 counter. But you can pay X and tap and remove that -1/-1 counter to return a creature card of mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield with an additional -1/-1 counter on it. Only at the sorcery speed, and the creature itself has Wither. I would only play this if I had ways of filling my graveyard, but this is effectively a 1-mana 2/2 that draw the card once you've jumped through all the hoops. You're not overpaying for that card you get back from your graveyard. If you get back a 3-drop for 3 mana, so it's perfectly reasonable to do this on curve. If you have looters or other ways to put the creature cards in your graveyard on curve. And a 2/2 with Wither is a pretty reasonable card in its own right. You do have to target a creature. You can't just tap it to remove the -1/-1 counter. There has to be a target. Skyray Tender. This might be the white creature I'm most excited about from this set. Just a white for a 1/1 human cleric, and when it enters, you get a 2/1 fish with flying. Now, not only is fish a very powerful creature type, this is just a lot of stats. It has a lot of important words on it. It makes tokens for all of the white cards that care about tokens. It gives you evasion. Evasion is something that's really hard to come by these days. So the 2/1 with flying is quite a real piece of cardboard. Um, it's very blinkable and reprievable for all the white cards that do that. I expect this to be kind of the default aggro white 2-drop from this point forward. There's really not a lot of competition for it. I mean, there's stuff like virtualized onomastic, but that's a lot less of like a beatdown card. This actually pressures your opponent pretty well. Moving up the curve, unfortunately, the 3-drop spot left open by what's his name? The Rough Rider is not being filled that well. But there are some other cards worth at least talking about. Nullblade Artisan is a 4-mana 2/3. It's got a line, and when it enters, you search your library for an equipment and you put it in your hand. And then it has 2 and a white tap, and of course, a line helps you pay for those. You can put an equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, if we had a giant equipment card, this card would be pretty nice. I mean, pretty realistic to get this thing down turn 3, and then activate it the following turn, do kind of a Stoneforge Mystic thing. But unfortunately for this card, not only do we don't have a lot of great equipment in general, and specifically not a lot of expensive equipment. The best expensive equipment in the whole format is from Solastere itself, and I'm going to read it here because it's only relevant in the context of Nullblade Artisan. Skyfall Sunder is a 5-mana equipment. When it enters, you get a 1/1, and you attach it to that creature. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control, and whenever it attacks, you get a 1/1. So, if you got 2 other creatures, it's 5 mana for a 3/3. Whenever it attacks, you get a 1/1. It's not exciting. I would never play this card unless I plan to cheat it into play for free with Nullblade Artisan, which is not a great sign for Nullblade Artisan. Typically, in for Stoneforge Mystic, you hope to have either a really enormous equipment or an equipment you would be willing to play anyways. Aureola Crusaris is one of our giant spirits with an adventure, and I'm bringing it up because the adventure is kind of interesting. It's called Path of Deliverance, and it says until end of turn, if a non-token, non-land permanent would enter and it wasn't cast, you exile it instead. Now, this is just kind of an interesting hate card, kind of a counterspell for stuff like Foreign Encounter or the triggers off Revolt at the Palace. And I think it's probably not worth playing just for that. You'd rather just play like an actual counterspell, but it has some interesting interactions with blink spells that hit your opponent's things. Soulspace Refit, notably, can hit your opponent's permanents, so you can exile their creatures, and then respond to your own Soulspace Refit with Path of Deliverance, and their creatures never come back. Similarly, with stuff like Auroric Savior from this set, it's a 4-mana 3/3 with flying, and it blinks every other non-token, non-land permanent. And if you cast this and Path of Deliverance in the same turn, then none of those permanents are going to come back. I think if this is played, it'll be like a sideboard build-around card. You'll have to be a blink deck that cares about these blink cards to begin with, and want to side in against stuff like Foreign Encounter, and then it kind of like also has the out of being useful without Foreign Encounter. Eltanon, the Silent Star, is a 10-mana creature, but it has the very interesting adventure Path of Stillness. X white white exile all non-land permanents of mana value X or less. This is strikingly similar to Scandalous Revelation. Scandalous Revelation is 5 mana. Usually you'll exile like 3 or less. Path of Stillness for 5 mana can also exile 3 or less. And in the decks that want Scandalous Revelation, getting to 9 mana is like a little more achievable. Those decks typically are control decks that are trying to go long. The 10 mana creature is nothing to write home about. It's just got flying and maybe indestructible. But Scandalous Revelation and Path of Stillness give you redundancy for this exile all non-land permanents, and gives potential to something like an Esper kind of non-permanent based control deck that gets all of its value from kind of ramp spells and card draw spells, rather than deploying card advantage planeswalkers and enchantments, or only expensive ones that could make use of these sweepers. A couple other white cards in more of the answer category. Starting off with Fate. Let's start from the left right. Oberys Ley Pilgrim is a planeswalker. There's a planeswalker in every color in this set. 1 white white, 3 loyalty planeswalker, and as it enters, you make an 0/4 artifact creature of defender. It's an as rather than a when, so that you don't create a trigger your opponent can respond to, and you always get to activate a loyalty ability. +1 gain 2 life, -2 exile artifact and enchantment, -7 turn all your stuff into 4/4s. You're not going to get to -7 very often. It takes a lot of turns. This is mainly a sideboard card, I think. This is a very potent anti-aggro card, especially if there's some artifacts and enchantments that you might want to pick off now and again. If you're facing off against an aggro deck that an 0/4 is a reasonable blocker against, It kind of comes down, gains you at least 4 life, presumably from the O4, and then gains you at least, and then you 2 life from the +1, and 4 life from the 4 loyalty planeswalker. So that's talking like 8 life minimum you've gained, and that's if they manage to deal with it all immediately and cleanly. And it could be a lot more than that. And if they have a couple, and if you can ding one of their Oblivion rings on the one of their Sanctum of Oppressions with it sometimes, that's great too. Helia Lacespire is 2 and a white for a 1/5 wall. When it enters, it exiles each opponent's graveyard, and if a card will be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. There's kind of a defender theme in this set, and a lot of the defenders are just good enough on their own. I mean, the obvious comparison here is Crucible of the Burning Sun, which is kind of the premier graveyard hate card. This is more expensive, which is a real big problem against these graveyard decks, which are often quite fast. But crucially, it's asymmetrical. If you want asymmetrical graveyard hate that stops Smiling Sludge, this is kind of your only option. So I expect to see it out of the sideboards, especially in creatureless decks or decks that have a lot of creatures, like some way to make the fact that the creature not so much of a liability. It does survive Frag, which is a commonly brought in sideboard card for dealing with stuff like Crucible of the Burning Sun. So that is nice on its own, too. Fateful Ascent, I'm very excited for. 1 and a white for an instant, destroys a creature or planeswalker, and its controller gets a chart token. Now, a chart token, I think people are undervaluing them. They're worth something, but they're certainly not worth a ton, and especially against the decks where you'd want to bring this in, the chart token's not going to be worth much. Swift Approach has really not been the same since its nerf, and Fateful Ascent looks to be taking its place as the default 2-mana white removal spell of choice. I expect to see this all over the place. Basically, its main competition is Sanctum of Repression. And I think the difference is if you care about instant, you play this. If you don't care about instant, you play Sanctum of Repression. Orbital Vacuum is another in our long list of 3-mana O-rings with significant upside. This one can hit any non-land permanent. It's an enchantment. And once each turn, when you cast a spell with mana value greater than the exiled card, you get a 1/1. Now that's not bad. It's kind of awkward in that inherently you want to hit expensive things with your or tokens with your Oblivion rings, but for this to work, you need to hit a cheap thing. You would need to have a decently high curve. I think, for example, like White-Green Rejuvenation Session Control could certainly consider this card. It certainly has a lot of competition with like Cassus Belly, Advance of the Quiet Moon, even Gone Pickin' and the one from Kitsuo Doesn't Time that is cycling. All of those have their reasons to be played. I don't think this card is spectacular. I think you'll actually struggle to get a ton of tokens off this very often, but certainly in the conversation for all sorts of white decks. Moving on to blue. Blue gets a bunch of very exciting instants and sorceries. Let me start with Cursory Glance. 1 in a blue for an instant, you counter a spell with mana values 3 or less. This is a reprint from our previous one of our previous Battle Cruiser sets, Gary of the Quaking City. It is a really good counterspell. I mean, this was a staple counterspell while it was in standard the last time. I expect it to be the same right now. Its main competition in the 2-mana slot is Overrule Thought. I expect you'll still play Overrule Thought if you care about the mill, but if you don't care about the mill, Cursory Glance is going to be your go-to from now on. Chart the Cosmos is 1 mana for a sorcery. You draw a card and get a chart token. This is a pretty efficient cantrip. If you care about chart tokens, either because like you don't mind hitting land drop number 5, or because you just like having artifact tokens, I think this is the real competition for Discern. Discern does have a lot of synergy. It has graveyard synergy, it has instant synergy, it has card draw synergy, it has casting spells synergy. A lot of reasons to prefer Discern, but if you don't care about any of those things, I think you might want Chart the Cosmos instead. And Dream Snare is blue for an instant. It bounces a creature, and if the creature had mana values 3 or less, you draw a card. Now that's going to draw a card pretty decently often. That's a lot of the creatures in the format that with mana values 3 or less, making this quite efficient. We do have Forced Ejection, at least for the next 4 months. Forced Ejection bounces any non-land permanent, and if you cast another instant or sorcery this turn, draw a card. And Forced Ejection usually goes in decks that can hit that card drop pretty consistently. By the way, now that these cards are on screen, I want to say that I love the aesthetic of Solastere. I mean, I love everything about it, but the aesthetic is real nice. I think Edge of Eternities might have sniped it somewhat, but even with that comparison, this is looking real nice. But yeah, if you don't have a ton of instant sorceries, Dream Stare is right up there with Force Ejection. There's also some support for a blue kind of tempo theme in this set. That's something that's been like experimented with from time to time. I know Zangief keeps trying to make it work, and mostly what has been lacking is good cheap creatures. You really want a cheap creature you can run out, and then while you're doing your tempo sing, those creatures will take over the game. And we got a really spicy one in Cascade Seer. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with prowess, which already that's not anything to sneeze at in constructed. But at the beginning of your end step, if you've cast 3 or more non-creature spells this turn, you get a tap token with the copy of it. And that token, it also has this ability. So once you got one token, the next time you do this, you get 2 tokens, and then it kind of grows exponentially. Casting 3 or more non-creature spells, that's not by any means easy, but we certainly do have a lot of very playable 1 mana spells. Industrialize gets you 2 casts just on its own. Unfortunately, we're losing Igneous Visions, which would have been great here. Discern, or the Chart the Stars from the last one is good. Terminal Impact, obviously, this deck's probably also playing red or black, so there's plenty of 1 mana removal spells you could be running. Yeah, this could make. I think there's a lot of support for kind of a blue-red, blue-black prowess deck that was just missing like a good cheap prowess creature, and this could be it. Another 1 drop is Komazoa. It's a 1 mana 2/2 jellyfish. When it enters, you put a -1/-1 counter on a creature you control, probably itself. Because you can pay blue and remove a -1/-1 counter on it, to counter a non-creature spell unless the controller pays 1. Um, yeah, we've seen 1 mana 1/1 flyer pay 1, and can pay 1 to counter a non-creature spell unless the controller pays 1 pretty often. And here, honestly, sometimes you'll be happy. Like, they cast a spell leaving a mana up to pay for this, and you'll just remove the counter to make them tap out, and get yourself the 2 mana 2/2 flyer that taxed them annoyingly. Maybe a sideboard card, maybe worth main decking. Midari Leyspire is 1 to blue for a 1/4 wall. It has you can pay 1 to change the target spell or ability to Midari Leyspire. This is probably not worth it, but if you have really high value creatures that are worth protecting, for example, in some kind of combo deck, or some deck that's very high synergy, or a deck, especially a deck that has a lot of instants in it and so can afford to leave up this 1 mana consistently, this is kind of on the fringe of playability. And 2 mana 1/4 defender, it's decently big. Moving up to some bigger creatures, there are some 3-drop options. Master of Null is a 3 mana 3/2. When it enters, you get a chart token, and whenever a land you control enters, you get a 1/0 orb, and orbs you control get ++1, so it makes 2/1s, but when it dies, all the orbs go with it. I think the main card this is competing with is Clash at Mistrit Vale, which is also kind of a 3 mana value engine blue card, but for something that blue decks are probably going to do more often than playing lands, and if additional upside over that. But Master of Null, there's some support for like a kind of a bigger blue-green, kind of blue-black, kind of mid-range grindy deck. And this could have some play here. We do certainly have a lot of fetch lands if you want to double trigger this. Nover, Omen of the Rift, is 1 blue for a legendary bird. It's got flash and flying, and whenever it attacks, you can either loot, or you can cast a spell from your hand with mana value equal to or less the number of cards you've drawn this turn. So probably 1, although if you've cast a card draw spell pre-combat, maybe 2 or 3. Smuggling Kingpin is a card of a similar effect that has seen some experimentation in previous Revolution Custom Standard formats, and I think this is probably definitely in competition with Frog of Eternal Gloom, and I think in general probably better, better body with the flying, and does something that decks that want Frog of Eternal Gloom are interested in, which is free cast their cheap cards. I don't think this card is spectacular, but if a blue tempo deck comes around, this might be its best choice for the 3-drop spot. Asulio, the Watchful Star, is another 9-drop, 10 mana, 9 mana, 10/10 with flying. It makes other non-land permanents lose all abilities, but it has an instant adventure that's very interesting called Path of Humility. 2 mana, until end of turn, non-land permanents lose all abilities, and abilities of non-land permanents don't trigger. So, to be clear, all non-land permanents that are in play as this adventure resolves will lose all abilities. Any permanents that come into play later in the turn, their abilities won't trigger, but they'll still have all their non-triggered abilities, if that's clear. This is a bunch of funky things. Obviously, it counters enter triggers on all sorts of things. It knocks off auras. It fizzles various abilities like the triggered abilities on sagas. You can stop a subroutine from running. It has a lot of little applications that could certainly add up to something worthwhile. Kind of Golden Bloom of the Silence is kind of the more sideboard card version of the deck. I wouldn't use Path of Humility kind of as my silver bullet answer to something, more if it had a bunch of incidental synergies. It does enough incidental things that it might have a home somewhere. Moving on to black, the headliner for black in this set is Twilight Ambush. This is a reprint from all-powerful set Blood-like Rivers. It's an instant. You destroy the creature of power 2 or less or toughness 2 or less. Solastere brings a lot of black cards that are just kind of straight upgrades over cards you're playing already. Here, Downlink Overload is a card that I would describe as begrudgingly playable and constructed. You don't want to be putting Downlink Overload in your deck, but you don't really have another option. Well, now you have a much better option. I don't think you're going to play Downlink Overload anymore, now that you have a very good 1-mana instant that crucially kills Exorcist of Errors and Fabricated Anomaly. Failed Gateway is another card that I think people begrudgingly played. It's our best infest right now. It's our only infest right now. 1 black black gives all creatures -2 and 2 in turn. Now you just play Aspis Venefear instead, which has that as an adventure. Path of Virulence is 1 black black to once again give all creatures -2 until end of turn, and you get to draw a 7-drop. And as I said, drawing a 7-drop is so much better than drawing an 8 or 9-drop. Which for me puts a lot of the uncommon adventure creatures well ahead of the rares and mythics, which are usually more expensive. And up at 4 mana, Reign of Blight was not even begrudgingly playable. I don't think it was played really at all. But now we have Nightfall, 2 black black for sorcery. You can either give all creatures -4/-4 until end of turn, or you can get a 4/4 black dragon creature token with flying. Languish is a card that was quite playable, a decent time ago in Canon Standard. This is Language with a significant upside of if your opponent isn't playing creatures or doesn't have enough creatures, or you already killed all their creatures, you can make a 4/4, which, will win the game eventually. This prevents you from having to put other win conditions in your deck, which I always hate doing. Yeah, white already had a okay 4-mana Wrath in, what's it called, Chromatic Rift, and now black has an excellent 4-mana Wrath too. Black control with these 3 cards, looking pretty good. That said, after the staple answer removal spell sweepers, the black cards kind of become a lot more situational. Zukar Null Champion is a 4-mana planeswalker. The numbers here are different from the numbers on Lackybot, so I might be wrong with this, but it's the same general shape. You can +2 it to give your opponent a permanent you control. You can 0 it to draw 2 cards, and then you get an enchantment token named Oblivion that makes you discard a card on your end step. And you can 0 it to deal 2 damage to any target, and you gain 2 life, but you get a enchantment token that makes you lose a life each turn. Now, the obvious joke is you make these enchantments, and then you give them to your opponent. This is also currently our only way of giving your opponent Borrow. A card that kind of was designed with the intent that you'd be able to give it to your opponent for value, but there was just never any way to do it, so you blinked it instead. Now you can still blink it, but you could also give it to your opponent. Other than that, Zukar, the play pattern, if you're not giving your opponent negative stuff, is probably just play it. If your opponent has a 2 toughness thing, you could ding it, and you don't mind the entropies that much. Otherwise, you're probably going to draw 2 cards, and then immediately discard one of them. Next turn, you're going to give your opponent the discard thing, and you're kind of going to alternate that. So it kind of draws you a card every other turn, and it starts saddling your opponent with these annoying enchantments. It's a fine 4-mana planeswalker. Celise is the main competition. Celise probably... Wait, Celise from Muldoon? No, Celise is from Cybros, isn't it? Celise, I think, is better than this. Unless you're, giving your opponent Borrow, which is funny, but I think probably less good than blinking Borrow. Especially because we get new ways to blink Borrow in this very set. Rastabal, the Enduring Sorrow, is part of the cycle of 9-mana 10/10 dragons with flying. It actually has a decent ability of ward, pay half your life, round it up, and whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. But also it has a 1-mana adventure that makes your opponent discard a card. And if they discard a land, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. The Rooftop Slink deck that tries to get its opponent's hand down to 0 as quickly as possible is always looking for more 1-mana ways to make the opponent discard, and this is currently one of our only 1-mana ways to unconditionally make them discard, i.e. it can't miss. Well, I guess it misses if they have no cards in hand, which is a real downside of a card like this. Rooftop Slink has been the kind of card that, boy, if you don't get up to an early start against the Rooftop Slink deck, you're not going to have a hand very soon. And this is going to be a part of it going forward. Mercenary of Dusk is black for a 3/2 Moonfolk Warrior. Ooh, there's Moonfolk in the set. It's got Menace. 2-mana 3/2 Menace is not a bad stat line. Whenever it enters attacks, any number of target players mill 2 cards. It's a fine mono black 2-drop. It enables graveyard synergies. It might mill them if you care about that. It's got 3/2 Menace. Every black 2-drop has the problem of it's competing with Exorcist of Errors. And to be honest, I don't think it's better than Exorcist of Errors. But it's not bad. Moving on to red. Red has a very exciting 1-drop in Dark Sun Migrant. It's a 1 mana 1/1, but whenever it attacks, you can discard a card, and if you do, it gets double strike until end of turn, and then you exile the top card of your library, and you may play it this turn. And it gets +1/+0 if you have one or fewer cards in hand. So, this is kind of a looter. It's kind of a looter for our looter decks. It doesn't draw cards for the purpose of, like, Research Grant, but it does, like, discard cards for the purposes of Dawnsworn Survivor, and if your deck is cheap, this is another kind of redundancy for Calamity Cat in the form of 1 mana creatures that can discard cards every turn. If for some decent aggressive upside. Double Strike is great with all the ways we have to pump creatures right now, like Calamity Cat itself, but also cards such as Face of Animosity. This plus Face of Animosity is a nice little casual 8 trample double strike damage as early as turn 2. And getting down to one or fewer cards in hand is pretty fast for a lot of these decks. I am pretty scared of this card. I'm just glad Momentous Charge is gone. Up at 2 mana, if you're heavy red, you can play Black Dawn Sellsword, the 2 mana 1/1 with double strike and haste, and you can pay 1 in a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. 2 mana, 2 power haste, basically, benefiting from the same combat trick and pump stuff that Dark Sun Migrant does with its double strike. Can pump pretty efficiently later into the game. It's competing with Cash Thrasher as your 2 mana haste creature of choice. I could see if you're like so aggressive you don't care about the memories off Cash Thrasher, I could see even wanting Black Dawn Sellsword instead. Especially because it provides redundant double strike creatures with Dark Sun Migrant, giving opportunity for kind of a heroic-ish double strike creatures plus pump spells deck. Now that you have 2 of them to work with. There's also Roseanne Firebrand, named after the sitcom that Morrow once wrote a script for. It's a 2 on a 3/3 with Wither and Haste. It's an elf shaman. On your end step, it gets a -1/-1 counter, and when it dies, doesn't leave the battlefield, just dies, you get a spirit token with power and type equal number of counters on it. So this is, once again, redundancy for the Expendable Arsonist deck. Expendable Arsonist card with a lot of synergy all over the format, but kind of held back by the fact that we only got one of them at 2 mana, which is really where you wanted them. Now we have another kind of similar, oversetted, hasty 2-drop that is temporary, although less temporary than Expendable Arsonist. That'll synergize a lot of the same things, and we might have the kind of the rebirth of the Lightnings deck that a lot of people in the community love and we haven't seen for a while. In terms of red answers, we got some good ones. The headliner is Stellar Flare. Exeter red, it deals 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker with mana value equal to or less than the amount of mana spent to cast it. So basically, it's terminal impact wording. To kill a 1-drop, it takes 1 mana. To kill a 2-drop, it takes 2 mana. To kill a 3-drop, it takes 3 mana. To kill a 4-drop, it takes 4 mana. To kill a 5-drop, well, maybe you can't kill their 5-drop always because it does only deal 5 damage. But this is kind of destroy a permanent by playing mana value, paying its mana value. This card is fine, but in terms of 1 mana removal, our only option previously was Shock. And if you're looking for a 1 mana card that can kill Huskforger Acolyte, but can also do things later in the game, I can see you playing this over Shock. Up at 3 mana, you could play Star Squall, 2 in a red for an instant, deals 2 damage to each creature, and you get a chart token. Main competition here is Saboteur's Immolation, which is same card, but instead of a chart token, you get Cycling 2. If you like chart tokens, you can play Star Squall instead. Draconos Tyrannos is an adventure creature, 8 mana, 4/8 with flying and fire breathing, but its adventure is just 3 mana sorcery, deals 4 to any target. We've seen Burn to Obscurity, which is a 3 mana instant, deal 4 to any target with kind of some trinket text. See play here and there. And Path of Destruction could see play kind of in the same spaces. Most of the decks that played Burn to Obscurity really didn't care that much about instant. Path of Destruction clears battles, kills medium-sized creatures, but mostly it's a burn deck, burn card for your burn deck that is kind of just generically interested in 3 mana, 4 damage to any target. And that deck might even cast the 8-drop occasionally. There is some support for kind of a big red idea in this set, with the biggest payoff being Nilliskant Layspire. It's a 5 mana 3/5 defender, and when it enters, it deals 5 damage to each creature that doesn't have defender and each planeswalker. So this is a 5 mana Wrath. It's a pretty hard Wrath. Not a lot of things more than 5 toughness running around. For your kind of white-red big red deck, or even your mono-red big red deck these days. And it leaves behind a 3/5 with Defender, which, a 3/5 Defender is going to hold off their attackers for a decent length of time. I think this card's really, really quite pushed, especially given that we have stuff like Shigana Manor Burns to get it out ahead of schedule. Another 5-drop you get out ahead of schedule is Kafella and Light Catalyst. 5 mana Planeswalker. 4 loyalty. Got Wither, and it gives your instant and sorcery with Wither. It can +2 to deal 2 damage to any target, which the joke is that has Wither, so it'll be 2 -1/-1 counters. If it's a creature, you can 0 it to make 2 1/1s with Wither, and you can -X it to cast an instant or sorcery mono value X from your graveyard. All 3 of the abilities are relevant. There's no like useless ultimate on this card. It's got only good things. Like your default play pattern is just a 5 mana planeswalker that makes 2 1/1s with Wither every turn. And that's a pretty reasonable clock in its own right. Obviously, you can kill off small creatures or shrink big creatures, and with a +2 no less. So pretty good at defending itself. And casting your instant sorceries from your graveyard can't cast Terminal Impact, unfortunately, but most others, this can bring back kind of like you can -2 it if you really deal 3 damage with one of your deal 3 damage spells, or you can start hitting bigger things as well. Yeah, very playable kind of red 5-drop 4 decks that care about red 5-drop. Even just like a generic mid-range deck, it's not bad. And we also have Suberon, the Fervent Star. This is the red member of the 9 mana 10/10 cycle. When it enters, if you cast it, you got 10 red for all that's worth. But most importantly, it's got a ritual. Path of Radiance is 2 in a red. You add quad red. But unfortunately for Goober combo, you can cast only one more spell this turn, which kind of puts the kibosh on the whole Goober idea. I think, unfortunately, I don't see a combo application. You got to use this fairly. You got to use this to cast Eva Viva on turn 3. Turn 2, Shigana Mana Burns. Turn 3, Path of Radiance into Eva Viva. Turn 3 Eva Viva is not bad either. Now, is your big red deck willing to play basically a Lotus Petal? I don't know. I mean, the famous saying is a combo deck is any deck that would play Lotus Petal if it could. And I don't know if Big Red's a combo deck, but on the other hand, as a Lotus Petal, it does draw you a 9-drop, which, if any deck could cast a 9-drop, Big Red's might be one of them. Moving on to green, there's a lot of support in this set for kind of a green, dirtily ramp land package. We got plenty of things to ramp into in Standard right now. Question is, how are we getting there? Well, we could get there with Andir Wild Soul, which is a 1 mana 1/1 that gets +1/+1 if a land you control enters this turn. Whenever it attacks, you can pay green to put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. If you came from your graveyard, get the finality counter. We have enough fetch lands right now, and enough ways to put cards in our graveyard early and often, that we can kind of treat this as a 1 mana 2/2, and whenever attacks, whenever attacks, you have to pay green to ramp yourself a land. Turn 1, Primal Fissure this. Turn 2, land, attack with this, get back your Primal Fissure, play another 1 mana card. Even if it trades off, you kind of got card advantage on that. I don't think you kind of want this in just a generic mono green aggro deck where you kind of would rather be spending your green mana on creatures that affect the board, not on ramping, even though it's quite efficient ramp. But even then, 1 mana 2/2 is a pretty decent stat line. I'm excited for the kind of decks this is going to enable. Up to 2 mana, Kynox Laypillar is a 1 green 0/3 defender. When it enters, you mill 2 cards and you return a permanent milled its way to your hand. This is a humble little 2-drop that kind of effectively draws you a card. It blocks well against aggro. Vow's Reflection is a card that always on the lookout for cheap stuff that's good to bounce and blink. I could see this becoming a piece of all sorts of kind of dirtily decks that appreciate the blocker. And Anhame Star Sower is 1 green for a 4 loyalty planeswalker that gets another loyalty counter whenever a land you control enters. And you can 0 for a chart token, or -3 to play an additional land this turn, and until end of turn, whenever a land you control enters, you get a 1/1. Now, she's not that great value the turn you play her. If you play her on curve, she's just going to maybe let you play an additional land and make you a 1/1 and be left at 2 loyalty, which is not that exciting. But we do have a lot of support for various landfallish things. Like if you can -3 this while there's an Aurora in play, well, now we're talking. Or if you can even use this whole packaging combination of Reaper of Blossoms to fill your graveyard with lands and get them back into your hands. You can keep playing with Anhame. Yeah, and Aurora is a decent finish, or you could ramp up into really big things, even Resource Inversion if you want to go that far. Green Ramp, it has lost Abominable Avalanche, which was a huge loss, but it still got Terminal Impact. So I think it still might have legs. In terms of more aggressive green cards, Ursus Minora is the standout. We didn't really have a good green 2-drop before. Now we do. It's a 2 mana 3/2, and whenever a land you control enters, it gets +1/+1 and goes trample in a turn. It's like Donglead Wildbear, except it doesn't bounce things. As long as you keep playing lands. That's pretty good. Dongleg Wildbear is a pretty good stat line. I don't have much else to say about it. You got to be heavy green for the double green, but you don't got to be mono green. We got good mono these days. Um, and it's going to beat your opponent's face in pretty reliably. Doesn't block it nearly as well because it's a 3-2 on their turn unless you crack a Primal Fissure or something. It's not if a land entered your control turn, so this could even attack for 5 on turn 3. Turn 2 play this, turn 3 playing crack Primal Fissure. You're almost certainly playing Primal Fissure anyway in this deck. Um, that's that's a real bit of upside right there. You can even play like Ardent Rise in this deck. Blightstalker is a 2 mana 2/2, and it has Scavenging Ooze decks. You can pay green and exile a card from a graveyard, and you gain 1 life. And whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. I think this is a fine sideboard card. If you're a green deck and you want your hate pieces to be 2 mana creatures for various reasons, you can play this and use it to hate out your opponent's graveyards. And it kind of has a shade ability where you can just pump a bunch of green mana into it, exile your own graveyard, make it enormous. There's some support for exiling cards from your own graveyard, but I think this is playable even outside of decks that care about this. I think it's probably a little better than Masksmith for that purpose, although obviously Masksmith also hits artifacts and enchantments. Plaguebane Hulk is a 5 mana card. It's a 5 mana 5/5 trample, and whenever it enters or attacks, you can destroy a non-creature permanent, and they get an everywhere. This is pretty good 5-drop. Vasilisa and Aurora are the 5-drops you're usually considering these days, and stands up there with them. Lots of decks have non-creature, non-land permanents that you'd love to destroy. It's just fine. It's not like, oh, this really makes me want to ramp to 5 mana in my green deck. It's just a thing you can ramp into. But I think the most impactful green card for the set might be Eternal Struggle. This is a green mana for an instant. It gives a creature you control +1/+1 and hexproof until turn. Or, crucially, you can exile target card from your graveyard and draw a card. So, we've had plenty of these 1 mana give a creature hexproof cards, but this one has cycling for 1 mana effectively. And it can hate graveyards, but more importantly, you can just cycle it. The real downside of putting these cards, especially in your main deck, is that sometimes they're dead. Sometimes you didn't get to protect your creatures because you had to tap out for them. And then you draw this card and you have no creatures, or you draw this card and your opponent doesn't have removal, you just want another threat. And this can cycle. That means I think you could actually main deck this card and really annoy the heck out of reactive decks with the fact that you have access to this. It can even be a combat trick, Sometimes you attack your Reaper of Blossoms into their Exorcist Affairs, and they block, and you play this and their Exorcist dies. That's a perfectly fine use case for it. When it has cycling 1, it doesn't have to do much. Step Beyond is a Rampant Growth. It's green, sorcery. You reveal a card from the top of your library until you get a land, goes on the battlefield tap, rests in the bottom random order. I think that if you're interested in 2 mana ramp, this is probably our best 2 mana ramp option, maybe other than, like, Shigana Mana Burns. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what decks are, in fact, interested in 2 mana ramp. Maybe that kind of green-red, green Jundish, just mono-green ramp deck would want this. But having a Rampant Growth is certainly relevant. That's kind of a first for the format. And Gorion Lacebire is 2 green for a 3/5 Defender Reach wall. And when it enters, you destroy all artifacts and enchantments mana values for LS. Now, I said earlier that Sundra's Avalanche is rotating. That's true. It has, in fact, rotated. And this is not as good as Sundra's Avalanche. It costs a mana more, and it doesn't have the removal mode, although it is a 3/5 with Defender and Reach. I mean, that's not... For playing against Hardsuit, that's a real piece. That's a real card right there. But this is clearly a sideboard card, but a very good one. You'll side it in exactly the same places you used to side in Sundra's Avalanche. Move on to the gold cards. There are a bajillion gold cards in this set, and I'm going to start by talking about Guiding Gladeheart because it's one of a ton of cards in this set that are 3 or 4 mana and are entirely hybrids. This is Selesnya, 4 Selesnya mana. And the way to think about these cards is you can treat it as a green-white gold card, you can put it in your green-white deck, or you can put this in your mono-white deck, or your mono-green deck. And Guiding Gladeheart is a 4 mana 2/2, it's got Ward 2, it's an elk, and at the beginning of your first main phase, you get 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens. This is a pretty reasonable engine creature. Pumps out tokens at a kind of silly rate. Got Ward 2, so it's probably not going to trade down our mana that badly. Perfectly fine top end for your white or green deck. Probably worse than Survivor of the New World if you're both white and green, but mono white 4-drop could certainly be worse. In white blue, Levicto Vizio is an 8 mana spirit. With it's an 8/8, it's got an attack trigger, but more importantly, it has passive evidence. One white blue puts a non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. That's real removal. 3 mana, sorcery speed, real removal for any non-land permanent. Sorcery speed's annoying, but that's, I think, fully worth considering in any white-blue control deck. Fills out your removal suite. If you're on like Scandalous Revelation and so you don't want to play Oblivion Rings as your 3 mana, as your kind of catch-all removal spell, I think this is probably what you play instead. Sunweaver Lyselle is a white-blue for I cut off the power toughness. The 2/2 Vigilance Moonfall Withered. Whenever she attacks, you can create a tapped attacking token as a copy of an type creature you control with mana value less than or equal to the number of attacking creatures, but you sack it at the beginning of your next end step. I think this is mainly useful if the Kitsuo Dusk of Time white-blue tokens deck ever gets off the ground. The deck has some powerful cards. It's got Hyomon, it's got Monkeying Around, and Simian Pupil. I mean, Lysel can always copy a token because tokens have mana value 0. I think that's probably the most common thing that she's going to copy. And so she's basically a backup Hyomon that doesn't have flying but could potentially copy something bigger, but the token goes away on end step. Redundancy is always nice. In blue-black, there's a bunch of really exciting cards. Torpor Harvester is the 4 mana all-hybrid card for Dimir. It's 4 toughness, its power is equal to the number of cards in your hand, and once each turn when you draw a card, you may pay 1 life, and if you do, draw another card. So just as baseline, this is a, what do you call it? This is a Phyrexian Arena. During your normal draw step, you'll draw a card, you'll pay a life, you'll draw an extra card. 4 mana, decently sized creature that draws you a card each turn, that's already pretty good. What you really want to do to really maximize this card is draw a card on your opponent's turn. What you want to do is on turn 5, you play this, you leave up 1 mana, and then you discern on your opponent's upkeep or something, and then Torpor Harvester will trigger, and you'll get to pay a life and draw a card immediately. There, plenty of ways to instant speed draw a card running around right now, and this can get pretty decently big in the decks that want it. Mono blue doesn't really have a 4-drop right now. Mono black is competing with Life Hacker. Life Hacker might be a little better, but in Mono blue, not that I think Mono blue is a great deck, this is probably your 4-drop. Cloud of Consciousness is 1 blue-black for a 3/1 elemental. And when it enters, you look at each player's hand, and you can make each player discard a non-land card of your choice, and if you do, they draw a card. This is a perfectly fine disruptive 3-drop, good against combo. Unfortunately, it discards non-exiles, so if they have discard synergies, they might be able to get them back. Good in a tempo deck, good in kind of mid-range deck, and of course, boy, this is hand attack on an enter trigger, so you can blink it with Jetstream Cruiser or Soul Space Refit to do this during your opponent's draw step and force him to discard the good card they drew and get a worse card. I'm sorry, but yeah, that's probably what you're going to do with it. Nether Invocation is 2 blue-black for an instant. You draw a card, and then you could either draw another card, or deal X damage to a creature or planeswalker and gain X life, where X the number of cards in your hand. I've been talking about this no permanent, all instant and sorcery control deck. Another great card for it. You're going to have lots of cards in hand if you're playing nothing but card draw. And so 4 mana, draw a card, ding something for like 5, and gain 5 life. That gain 5 life is pretty relevant here. And having the out of 4 mana instant draw 2 cards rather, is a good fail case. Good in probably the same deck as Scandalous Revelation. Black-Red gets an exciting card in Precursor to Calamity. It's 4 Rakdos mana for a 4/4 with Menace, Haste, Wither, player can't gain life, and damage can't be prevented. In Mono Black, as I said, if you're in Mono Black aggro, this probably clears all the other Mono Black 4-drop you could be playing. In Mono Red, the main competition is Ardor. This certainly put pals on the damage a lot faster than Ardor if you're not also a token deck. And so I think if you're not a token deck, this is your new Mono Red 4-drop of choice. Damage can't be prevented isn't that relevant. Players can't gain life is probably a downside for the black decks that would probably have some life gain themselves, but it's a nice thing to have around. I don't know, the 4 mana 4/4 with Haste and Menace and Wither. And it doesn't take a genius. Put it in your mono red deck, and hopefully that's good. Form of the Sun is another weird 4-drop. It's a 4-1 enchantment, and when it enters, you gain 10 life. At the beginning of your first main phase, you put 2 star counters on it, and it deals damage equal to the number of star counters on it to up to 1 target creature planeswalker, but also you. If you play it, you gain 10 life. Nothing happens. Go to your next turn. It can ding something for 2. You go to your next turn. It can ding something for 4. You go to your next turn, you ding for 6. But whenever it dings something for that much damage, it also dings you. I think you need ways to sacrifice this, and you need to make sure you know you'll have a target for the 2 damage thing. I think this is overall sketchy, although extremely cool. But it does has sufficiently large numbers on it that I could see there being synergies that make this really worthwhile. Ignavis Imantis is kind of just a little kind of speed bump card. It has its adventure is Path of Absolution, black red for a sorcery. Each player discard the card, and if you discard the card this way, draw a card. I've been mentioning there's kind of a discard deck in standard, rooftop slink kind of deck. Make your opponent discard all their cards. That deck's usually not red, but if it was, it'd probably play this card. Wildermoon Compulsion is a card I haven't seen a lot of people talking about, but this card seems to me entirely nuts. It's red-green for sorcery. You have to sack an artifact or creature, and then you get a 4/4 bear, and you draw a card. So this is not, even if you sacked a real creature this is not card disadvantage, because you get the card back. So you're down this Wildermoon Compulsion and the thing you sacked, and you get back 2 things, the 4/4 bear, and you draw a card. But also, if you have sackable 1-drops, this is just you just get a 4/4 on turn 2. Like, Newborn Oni is probably the best thing to sack to this. That's on color. Turn 1 Newborn Oni, turn 2 pay a life, sack it to Wildermoon Compulsion, get your treasure token. You can even attack with Newborn Oni before casting this if you think it has a clean attack. Turn 2, you have a 4/4 and a treasure, and you're basically even on cards. You haven't done any card disadvantage. That's pretty ridiculous. And there's tons of artifact and creature tokens all running around. You could play Catch Consul if you want more sack fodder. But honestly, I'd play this even in just like a deck where I'd have to sack my Husk Forgers to this. That's not even that bad. Proclaimer of Blooming Wing is another way of getting disposable tokens. If you have a clean attack of Proclaimer of Blooming Wing, you can sack the illusion post-combat to this, and that's basically free. This card's really good. It means a red-green, not even like a red-green sack deck. I mean, just kind of like a red-green cheap small creatures deck. Has a real potential. Another card for kind of this red-green sack deck, Ikosa of the Old Blood, is 1 red-green for a 1/3 Elf Shaman with haste. Whenever she attacks, you get a 2/1 tapped and attacking, and you sack it next end step. And you can also sack a creature to give her indestructible until end of turn. So this is a free sack outlet. Actually, only our second free sack outlet. After Envoy of the Fallen. It's in red-green, which is weird colors for a sack outlet to be. But it's basically a 3-mana 3/3 haste. That's hard to kill, especially in combat. I think we have various 3-mana 3/3 hastes running around right now. We have Thea. We have the other one from Airs in the West, Competitive Hedonist. They haven't generally been worth it, but if sacrificing creatures is the thing you care about, some kind of Jun Smiling Sludge deck, or if you care about creating tokens, this does trigger your like Kitsune Matriarch, if that's something you care about, then I could see this. Last Wish is a weird card. It's a 6-mana sorcery. You can play a card you own, not named Last Witch, from outside the game this turn. And you untap up to 5 lands. So this is basically 6 mana, and you get to cast a 5-drop of your choice, although you have to still have the colors of mana for it, because you have to use your own lands. I don't know if there's a deck that has such a toolbox of 5-drops that it wants to pay an additional mana for them. I guess you could be like a red-green ramp deck, and you could play this to get Vasilisa, Aurora, or the new one from this set that hits non-creature permanents. That's maybe a fine little package to have access to. You could have an Eva Viva in there, maybe, for a rainy day. It's interesting. There might be some kind of like combo or deck building application that I'm not big-brained enough to see right now. Certainly, when I see untip up to 5 lands on a sorcery, that certainly raises some alarms. I mean, the other idea for this is if you can make this mono positive, this does not exile itself. So if you could actually play this just not caring that much about the cards you're playing from inside the game, not named Last Witch, mostly just for the untapped 5 lands text. If you can like recur this or recast this or copy this, like you could Last Wish for a thing that lets you cast Last Wish from your graveyard. I don't know. I don't see it right now, but that I could imagine combo applications on a card that adds 5 mana and does not exile itself or have any other restrictions on it. Black-green gets one of the most exciting cards of the set in Meteor Hellion. It's a 4-mana 3/2, and when it enters, you can either destroy a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less, or you can look at your opponent's hand and exile a card with... Sorry, you can discard a card of mana value 3 or less. I mean, this is just a clean 2-for-1. Mana value 3 or less hits almost everything you care about, or at least hits something against every deck. I mean, not much to say here other than if you're playing black and green, you should put this in your deck as your mid-range 4-drop. I mean, just Jund mid-range. Turn 2, Exorcist. Turn 3, Fabricated Anomaly. Turn 4, this. That's just a fine Jund them out sort of curve. Also, some white-black cards on this page. Waygate Bulwark is 1 white black. It says each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and it drains your opponent for 1 each end step. Sideboard card. Beats combo. That's about what I have to say about that. Moonbeam Artisan is 3 Orzhov hybrid for a 3/2 with lifelink, and when it enters, you get the artifact or enchantment with mana value 1 or less. Search from your deck into your hand. There aren't like incredible things to get. You could get Laystone of Being if you're a Laystone deck. You could get Archival Storage if you want some Graveyard Hate. You can get Planned Obsolescence if you're a Planned Obsolescence deck. You could get Receive. That's some card draw. Like all tutors, it'll either do nothing or there'll be a card you really want to get, probably Planned Obsolescence, and then it'll be broken. My guess is it probably won't do anything, at least right now. Blue-green is Flash in the set, and it gets some real spicy ideas for what has been historically Revolution's worst color combination. Omen Mare is a 4-mana 3/2 elk, and it just looks absolutely fabulous. Also, when it enters, it counters a non-creature spell or destroys a non-creature non-land permanent. Now, annoyingly, against some decks, is just gonna miss, which you hate to have your kind of big payoff build around card miss sometimes, but most decks have non-creature spells and or permanents that you can hit with this, and if you do, it's a little bigger than a Mystic Snake and a little easier to cast. Your other 4-drop option from the set is Astraling, which is 4 Simic Hybrid for a 4/4. Got flash, it can't be countered, it gets +1, you can pay a Simic Hybrid to give it +1/+1 until turn, or to give it Hexproof, Vigilance, Trample, or Reach. I think this is a fine kind of blue-green flash card, but I think just as relevantly, this is a pretty good anti-control card in either mono green or mono blue. Mono green loves the idea of 4 mana, can't be countered. I'll just leave up a mana to give it hexproof every turn, and I can just pump tons of mana into it to give it +1/+1, and kill control decks with it. Control decks, they don't look great right now in general, but if they would hate to see this card. Interstellar Save is another key part of this kind of flash package. Blue-green for 2/1 flash. When it enters, if it isn't a token, you can exile an instant or card with flash from your graveyard and cast a copy of it. Basically, this is Snapcaster Mage, but only for instants and cards with flash. Snapcaster Mage is pretty good. You can grab Discern Rickets, you can grab Path Judgment if you're more creature heavy, you can grab Faithline Marshal, Unravel Thoughts. It's kind of blue-green flash deck. I don't know if it'll be good, but what I can tell you, I know Zangief's going to play it. Moving on, we're going to finish off our gold cards with some burn. Lunar Awe is a very powerful lightning strike effect. Blue-red, it deals 3 damage to any target at instant speed, and if you deal a permanent damage this way, you counter all activated and triggered abilities from its source, and it loses all abilities until end of turn. So that annoyingly means if you try to defeat a battle with this, or reach the mid-stage of a battle with this, you won't get the triggered ability, if it's the triggered ability, which is annoying. But it also means if your opponent plays like an Exorcist, you could kill it in response to the Exorcist trigger, and that would counter the Exorcist trigger. So they wouldn't have chosen their hand. You could use it to prevent the Puzzle Box token from appearing off of a Fabricated Anomaly. It generally counters your enter triggers. Nice. Basically, if you're blue-red, this is your new lightning strike of choice, unless you really care about tokens for coordinated shot. Ucus Crusaris is a 8-mana unicorn spirit. It's got abilities, but more importantly, it has Path of Exoneration, which is a sorcery speed adventure, red-white, deals 3 damage to any non-player target, and you gain 3 life. I think if you're a red-white deck, especially like Big Boros or something like that, maybe Jeskai Battle Control, I think you seriously consider this over your other 2-mana 3 damage rule spell options. Gaining life is nice. These decks often they can deal with sorcery speed. Non-player target. So yeah, probably not for any aggro decks for a number of reasons. But this is one of the Avengers I think is closest to being an on-rate card, which is why I'm higher on it, even though the 8-drop's nothing to write home about. Ethereal Exodus is 4 mana for an instant. It deals 2 damage divided as you choose, and you get 2 1/1s of flying. It's just a really good card. I don't see as having an obvious home. There's not a deck that really wants 4 mana instants right now. The bar for a 4 mana card is pretty high. I just want to draw attention to this because it's like this is a this is a claimed on Goblin. It's creatures and burn. Um like that what's that quick shot sniper, whatever it's called. The 4 mana 2/3 artifact creature from Neon Dynasty that dealt 2 damage to something when it entered. People play that occasionally. Like it doesn't take much if you're getting a creature and a real spell on the same card. And finishing up our staples, there's only one colorless card, non-land colorless card in the set I think is worth discussing. Astral Displacer is a 2 mana artifact. You choose a non-land card name. Spells the chosen name that would cost less than 7 mana cast, cost 7. It's Trinosphere text, so it raises the cost up to 7 if it cost blue before and now costs 6 in a blue. Anti-combo card, the reason you play this over Golden Bloom with the Silence is if the combo card you're trying to hate out is is an instant sorcery or creature. Yep. Basically, otherwise you play it for the same reasons. Let's go on to some old decks that already existed in Exalted Trilogy Standard that get new life with Solastere. Starting with Spellslinger, now the Savvy Smith Covetous Frostworm deck has always been hanging out at the edges, and now it gets a lot of new tools. Cascade Seer, I drew attention to before as a 1 mana prowess card, something you're always looking forward to, and also Crackling Moonkite, 3 is it hybrid for a 2/3 flying prowess, and it reduces your non creature spells by 1 mana of any color. Funnily enough, if Old June was still in the format, this would have an infinite with Cryo Phoenix and Igneous Visions, but unfortunately, I don't see any infinites for it right now. Instead, this is just it discounts your spells, but crucially, it discounts your 1 mana spells to cost 0. And 0 is a hell of a cost. It's a lot less than 1. Um, really, the pro for Spellslinger decks is they now have so many creatures: Cascade Seer, Crackling Moonkite, Covetous Frostworm, and Savvy Smith, and you probably don't have room for 4 different creatures in your Spellslinger deck. It also gets a bunch of great new spells: Lunar Awe, Cursory Glance, Stellar Flare, um, blue-red, prowessy, spellslingery stuff. Seems like it might be alive and well. Another frequently blue-red deck that might play Lunar Awe is Looters, the kind of Dawnswarm Survivor deck. Now that deck also loses Igneous Visions, which is sad, and all that remains is it often played. But it does get an interesting new one-drop. Well, not just Dark Sun Migrant, which of course this deck loves because it discards cards, but also Dire Visionary. 1 mana for a 1/1 Elf Shaman. You can pay red and tap it to discard a card, draw a card. But crucially, whenever a player discards a card during your turn, usually yourself, you can pay 1 mana to get a 1/1 with flying that can't block. I mean, I don't know if this is worth it. It's a little mana intensive, and the body's not great on its own. But if you're using like your Ignited Souls and Gilded Noon Entertainers and Fabricated Anomalies to discard a card basically every turn, I think this is a way of converting that into 1/1 flyers, which is a pretty decent rate. Also, it's not once per turn. So if you like discard a card to Ignited Soul and then discard a card to a Fabricated Anomaly and then discard a card to a Stargazing, you can make 3 1/1s. Also on this page, Nilemonger is a 2 mana 4/3. Makes you discard a card on your upkeep, and on your end step, your opponent probably loses 1 life because you discarded a card, and maybe make them discard a card, but probably not. This is probably not good enough, but if you can keep losing Dawnsworm Survivor, you can bypass this downside. But still, and to be honest, the 2 mana slot in the Looter deck, you played Gilded Noon Entertainer, but you weren't like enthused about having to play Gilded Noon Entertainer. So maybe you play this instead. Reanimator. Now Reanimator gets you would expect Reanimator to get a lot of stuff from a set with a 7+ mana creature theme, and it gets some things. It gets a new reanimation spell in Umbris Surrectus. It is Orzhov, 3 white black to return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's fine. That's a fine reanimation spell. 5 mana rather than the 4 on Reclaim the Fallen, but you'll live with it. But also the creature side, which because you're putting this in reanimation deck, that creature is actually a little more relevant. It's a 9 mana 9/9. Whenever it attacks, you can return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So basically, you can play this as probably you still play 4 Reclaim the Fallen, but you could play this as reanimation spells number like 5 and 6 for even more redundancy, and it's also a big creature you can discard and bring back, although obviously not as good as the big creatures without adventures like Privilege Escalation. I think the ability to have slot compression of a reanimation spell and a big creature in one card makes it much more likely that you'll actually assemble your reanimation plan. The only downside is you have to play white, and white doesn't really get you much else for your reanimation plan. In terms of things to reanimate, I think Privilege Escalation is still probably the best, but there is Asulio the Watchful Star and Rustabal the Enduring Star, two of the 9 mana 10/10 dragons, um, that both have reasonably useful adventures, although obviously adventure them, you can't reanimate them because they're in exile, and are pretty decent on the battlefield as well, that you could consider as alternate reanimation targets. Aristocrats is a deck, the Envoy of the Fallen deck, can't combo anymore, but with substitute, but it is, I think, still one of the best decks just kind of going into the next format. And it got a bunch of medium cards and one really, really good card. Kara's Martyr is a 1 mana 1/1, and when it dies, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. And if that wasn't enough, you can play 1 in a black and sack it to draw a card and lose a life, which will trigger itself. So it's basically 1 in a black, sack it, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. I think this probably replaces the Catch Constables at least in the Envoy of the Fallen Aristocrats deck. Um, that deck already makes a ton of treasures. Now, while you're making those treasures, you can also draw cards, find your stuff more reliably, sack this to Envoy, bring it back um, what's it called? Bring it back with other envoys, bring it back with the white black hybrid cards from Cybros that I forget the name of that makes things into artifacts. I think this is just like more. You can sack this to your deadly disputes, and then you'll draw even more cards. This is just more velocity, more card filtering in your aristocrats deck, which is exactly what it needs to assemble its combo. Finds its smiling sludge, which it really relies on. Finds its God Slaughter Titan, and it's even a way. It even unlike stuff like Omen Skulker, it has an inherent way to sacrifice itself. So if you just really need a Smiling Sludge trigger, or if you just really need to draw the cards, you can get at them. This card's really excellent in Aristocrats, which I think will be one of the kind of standout best decks in the early next format. Other maybes for Aristocrats, Oblivion's Escort's another 1/1 that dies into a 1/1. This one's white, annoyingly, which is not the color you want to be when you're playing Envoy of the Fallen, although it does have an inherent sacrifice ability to give a creature indestructible until end of turn. So that's nice. Can protect your envoys. Perilous Sojourn's a 4 mana enchantment. When it enters, you get a chart token. In the beginning of combat on your turn, you can sack a non-land permanent to get a 3/1 of Trample and Haste. 4 mana is probably a little slow for 1 sack a turn, but the 3/1s are nice for kind of if you're on a more fair plan. Darkstar Envoy is a 3 mana 2/2 that comes with a 1/1 and a chart token, so a decent amount of sacrificable value. And you can tap it and sacrifice 2 artifacts and 2 other creatures, which the Aristocrats deck sure does generate artifacts and creatures. Each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, and add black. Um, Honestly, this might be too slow for Aristocrats, but once again, if you're going on a more fair plan, it is instant speed, so you can even kind of do this. Although if you do it instant speed, you probably won't be able to use the mana. Um, I think you'll have no trouble activating this. It's just like, do you want to activate this instead of doing more explosive things if you're 3 mana play, like play Serve again? Ikosa the Old Blood is another free sack outlet. I don't think you splash green for this, but if you really want another free sack outlet, it's there. Naya Kokos. Now, this is the Revolt at the Palace Foreign Encounter deck, and it gets another Koko, which I'm not sure it needs another Koko because honestly, there's a limit to how many Kokos you can play in your deck before it cuts into your creature count. But Ravenous Stirrings is 4 mana for sorcery. You find 4 creature cards with mana values 3 from your deck, and you reveal them. Your opponent chooses 2 of them to go back into your library, and the other 2 go onto the battlefield. So this always gets you 6 mana value worth of stuff for 4 mana. Although it's the worst possible 6 mana value stuff. You want to play this with just generically good mid-range 3-drops. Good news. There are a lot of generically good mid-range 3-drops in this format. I mean, just the top of my head, if you're in Naya, you've got Ironback Tyke, Redeemer of Hallowed Flesh, Fabricated Anomaly, as 3 completely excellent ones that you could get. And the step from those 3 down to the next best one isn't even that big. For example, you could put in Moonscarred Champion, which is a 3 mana 3/3, but if damage would be dealt to it, you prevent that damage and put a -1/+1 counter on it. This one, it's pretty good with a foreign encounter, because the +1/+1 counter will counteract one of the -1/-1s. This thing can be pretty annoying against aggro. You could get Star-Crossed Vessel, 3 Gruul Hybrid for 3/3. When it dies, you get 3 1/1s. Now, the annoying thing with this in your Naya Koko deck is that Naya Koko deck is very much a Huskforger deck, and you can't turn 2 this off Huskforger. That probably disqualifies it. You could play Roseanne Laypillar in your the Naya Koko deck has trouble playing removal sometimes because it really wants all its removal, because it really wants all its cards to be 3 mana value creatures for foreign encounter, and Revolt of the Palace. Roseanne Laypillar is a 3 mana O3 that deals 3 damage to any target when it enters, so it's not great, but it is removal that meets that criteria. And if your opponent keeps putting your cards into your graveyard, you can use Cosmic Reverse to put Cosmic Rebirth at to instant speed, put them back onto the battlefield. This is a reprint from Canon. It also gains you 3 life. Probably more of a sideboard card in this deck. Will Ravenous Stirrings replace Revolt of the Palace? I could see going down to like 3 Revolts of the Palace 2 Aziz or the other way around just for a nicer curve experience. Tokens. Now, this is usually the EO deck these days, although there's plenty of other like white, straight, white, red token decks. And I already mentioned Radiant Pilgrim, which kind of like is your backup Kitsune Matriarch, a card that a 1-drop that gets value if you keep making tokens. Oblivion's Escort, which I just mentioned, can protect your big creatures and is also a token maker. If this deck is Naya for EO, I could see it easily playing Wildermoon Compulsion, sacking any of its various dinky tokens that it got off its Wraith Alarms to make 4/4 bears and draw cards. Ikosa of the Old Blood makes a token every turn for your Kitsune Matriarch and Radiant Pilgrim. And Lakufe Kilncaller, this is a card I haven't mentioned before. 2 mana 3/3, but it enters, puts a -1/-1 counter on something, usually itself, because you can pay a white mana and remove that -1/-1 counter to give your whole board +1/+1 until end of turn. If you're going wide, you're playing all the Raise the Alarms, I think this could just barely make the cut. 2 mana 2/2, pay a white mana to give your whole board +1/+1, and for the kin color itself, that's permanent. It's like not exciting, but I think it might just be what the doctor ordered. And it's not like you're competing with a ton of other great 2-drops in your tokens deck, other than, the Raise the Alarms. Heartsuit. Now, Heartsuit actually gets some moderately interesting cards. Acolyte of the Beyond is pretty humble. It's a 1 mana 1/1 lifelink that makes a chart token, but crucially, it has lifelink. Now, one of the problems that a tuned Acolyte constantly runs into is it can get like 7 instances of Exalted pretty easily, but then your opponent just chump blocks. Now, lifelink is not the ability you really want. What you really want was flying, but in the absence, lifelink's a pretty good thing if you're giving your creatures tons of power and toughness. Hardsuit certainly creates a lot of artifacts and enchantments, so it might be able to play Invasion Campaign. 1 light black, you make a 3/2, and then it's an enchantment, and then whenever another artifact enchantment enters, you get it back to your hand. I mean, it'll be easy to make lots of 3/2s with this, I just don't know if you want a lot of 3/2s. Maybe a sideboard option. Gives you a way to grind. Evangel of the Long Night, 1 white for a 2/2, makes a chart token, but if you would create 1 or more tokens while you have 7 or more lands, you get that many 4/4s with flying. I don't know how often Heartsuit gets to 7 or more lands. Maybe it's a slightly different build. Um, I think this card is going to struggle to find a home just because there's not a lot of decks that care about making lots of tokens and having 7 or more lands in play. But it's like a decent kind of just generic card, and Heartsuit might be a place for it. Maybe once again out of the sideboard. Also, card I'm going to bring up again later, Kara's Monument is 1 white for an enchantment. It enters with a charge counter, and whenever another enchantment you control enters, you get a charge counter. And whenever an artifact you control enters, you can remove a charge counter from it to draw a card and make it into a 3/3 with flying. Now, flying is an ability Heartsuit certainly cares about, and Heartsuit is a deck that makes a lot of artifact and enchantment tokens. And if you can just like play 1 enchantment and 2 artifacts after playing this, then I think it's already paid for itself. And Heartsuit can certainly do that. Rejuvenation Control doesn't get any, big hits. What Rejuvenation Control would love more than anything else is redundancy for Welkin Eviction, like another expensive permanent that easily gets discounted down to a cheap permanent, so it could Rejuvenation Session more reliably and not have to have bad Rejuvenation Sessions. Instead, what you got is Sunsower, which is basically what was it called? Basically a Soul Warden. I don't know if the version of Rejuvenation Control that plays friggin' Survivors of the New World and therefore has a lot of creatures, that version might actually appreciate a Soul Warden out of the sideboard. Rejuvenation Control also probably can bring it out of the sideboard Oberys Lay Pilgrim against burn and aggro. Exactly the kind of deck that'd be interested in these 3 mana value permanent that does nothing but gain life and deal with artifacts and enchantments. It could play Orbital Vacuum. It certainly has a lot of high mana value spells that could trigger Orbital Vacuum and get it 1/1s off of that. And it's another place where you could end up playing Cosmic Rebirth, get back stuff like your Sanctum Repressions. Goober Combo. Now, Goober Combo lost the Seer of the Night, whatever it's called, the card of Wander that you used to go infinite once you had 3 Goobers. Without that card, I don't think there's a clean way of deterministically winning from Goober Combo, but Goober Combo was fine even when it couldn't deterministically win. Just, draw its entire deck and make infinite treasures. And it gets another great mana positive 3 MP3 is what we call them in the biz. Cosmic Bounty. 2 and a red, instant, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards, and you get a treasure token. So this is mana neutral with 2 goobers and mana positive with 3 goobers. Goober just wants critical mass of cards like this, and honestly, you don't need Seer of the whatever it was called. You can just kill them with Dante's Inferno or whatever, or Terminal Impact. That also works. Golems. Now, there are 2 reasonable golems in the set. Light Pierced Envoy is a 1 mana 1/1, and when it dies, you get a weapon token. And Solemn Simulacrum. I don't know if you've heard of this card before. It's a 4 mana 2/2, and when it enters, you get a basic land onto the battlefield tapped, and when it dies, you draw a card. Now, is the existence of 2 new golems enough to make Unspeaking Titan and Co. good again? No, I don't. I think if Light Pierce Envoy was like a generically playable card, maybe. But honestly, I think the Titans are like pretty bad right now. They would have been kind of unplayable with just the nerf to Ozin's Blessing, but with also the nerf to the Titans themselves, I think it's going to take a lot to make them good again, and this is not enough. Blink was a deck that I guess I was the only one who ever ran the Boro Blink deck, but I don't know. I think that deck was fine. And it's getting some new tools in this set. Femoros Ley Pillar is 2 and a black for a 1/3 defender. When it enters, target player reveals their hand, and you get to Thoughtseize them. You may notice there's no cast restriction on this. There's no timing restriction on this. If you blink this on their draw step, you get to Thoughtseize them during their draw step. The curators are not going to let me do this. This card's going to get changed. I just wanted to mention it. Cepheus de Lugo, unlikely to get changed. It's a Kraken. It's an 8 mana card. And it has an instant adventure, 1 and a white-blue hybrid to blink immediately any non-land permanent you own. Comes back under your control. This is just more redundancy. We kind of already had Breeze Stop, which does something similar, but now we also have this one, which gets you an 8-drop. I don't know if you need an 8-drop when you're drawing a bajillion cards with Boro, but it's easier to cast, at least. And a kind of weird card for the Blink deck, kind of more suited for a different Blink build than what we've been doing so far. Auroric Savior. 4 mana 3/3 flying, all Azorius hybrid, and when it enters, if you cast it, you slow blink every other non-token, non-land permanent. So, doesn't hit your Boro tokens, thankfully. But if you have if you're playing a blink deck, it's less of like the blue-black or Esper tempo flash blink deck, and it's more of just like a value blink deck that blinks things on your turn and blinks things with card draw triggers and make token triggers. Maybe you play that white 2 mana 1/1 that makes it 2/1 when it enters. Then this could be kind of a top end that gets you a really large amount of value. Angel Scam! Radiant Devotee did not get nerfed because Peacock did not win enough matches. And now we get a new Angel Soldier. Blinded Herald with a 2 mana 1/1. When it enters, you get a weapon token. It's got flying. It's an Angel Soldier. Boy, how bad of an Angel Soldier are you willing to play in your Radiant Devotee deck? Maybe this is still good enough. There's also another Angel in this set called Oralef the Sunshard. It mostly cares about life gain. It's green-white for a 1/3 flying lifelink. I mean, Radiant Devotee, they'll play any... You have to play green, annoyingly, because Radiant Devotee kind of wants to be kind of near mono white, so you benefit from all the mono white payoffs and consume the divine. So I don't know if Oralef fits, but you know what? Any angel's a plan. Any angel's a plan. Now let's talk about new packages. New decks that don't exist right now, but could exist now. Unearths. There's kind of a lot of support for kind of a black base, low curve, plenty of unearths aggro deck. March of the Long Night, black sorcery. It's an unearth and your opponent loses 3 life. Fleshless Flare, the 1 mana 2/2 that can't block, but whenever a creature enters from your graveyard or you cast a spell from your graveyard, it comes back from your graveyard to your hand. Hollow Prophet, the 2 mana 2/2 with a line, so you can convoke it, and it has X black tap to reanimate a creature of mana value X, and that's not like only the sorcery, but that's not only once. You can just keep doing that. They come back with finality counters, I guess. There's not like a huge number of blacks 3-drops I want to bring back unless I'm splashing other colors for stuff like Vardo Ravalan. But these 3 cards kind of like give me the picture of a black deck that discards cards to Ignited Soul, maybe. Kind of Hollow Prophet is a pretty efficient card. You play a lot of cheap creatures, you play some value 3-drops, maybe your second color is red, maybe it's green, maybe it's white. You kind of grind up value in the graveyard. You ding your opponent with various kind of burns and pings. There might be something there. Another place that looks properly scary in the right here is black green leaving graveyard value. So there used to be cards like this in Awakening and Uldoon, and they all got changed because they were broken and impossible to interact with. So now we got new ones, and they do only trigger during your turn, but I don't know if that's going to be enough to save them. Putragoyf is the most exciting and most unfair looking of these cards. It's 4 Golgari hybrid. It's an 0-1. It's a Lurgoyf. It gets +2/+2 for each card type from the card in your graveyard, so it's a Lurgoyf, but it's twice as big. More importantly, when it leaves the graveyard during your turn, you mill 4 cards. So if you're exiling cards from your graveyard to Fabricated Anomaly, or to any other card that exiles stuff from your graveyard, um, you just get more cards in your graveyard. It kind of gives it's this card looks like it would be busted in Modern Dredge. Now, I don't know if we have the pieces of Modern Dredge in Revolution, but maybe we might have just barely enough. Grave Prophet, the uncommon for this archetype, 1 black green for a 2/2 Elf Druid. Once during each of your turns, when a card's in your graveyard, you draw a card and you'll gain 1 life. Now, in canon, there's Kishla Skimmer, which is the Simic 2 mana 2/2 flying version of this. That one's clearly a lot better. But even this, if you can draw a card for this every turn, and once again, Fabricated Anomaly is a good way of doing that. You can also Catabolist is a card I didn't put on these slides, but Catabolist is absolutely part of this whole kind of graveyard shenanigans thing. You could get cards back with Reaper of Blossom. There's a lot of support for this. Unfortunately, we just lost the fungus. There was a 2 mana 3/1 fungus from Muldoon, whatever it was called. That was a great way to do this. And it even has 4 mana to put a card from a graveyard in the bottom of its owner's library, which you can do to your own graveyard to draw a card. Blightseer is a 4 mana 3/5, and whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, you get a 1/1 with Wither. More importantly, when it leaves your graveyard during your turn, you get a 1/1 with Wither, and it can't block. So all of these cards, they're kind of clunky, but the ability to get free value from your graveyard, I've learned never to underestimate it. Even if you're just going to discard your Putragoyfs and your Blightseers, you're never going to cast them, and then they're going to exile them to some effect or another, and you're going to get free value. There's a interesting package in the set. I already talked about Karaz's Monument, but there's a whole package of black and white cards that care about artifacts and enchantments. Lightless Conquest is a 2 mana enchantment. When it or another enchantment you control enters, you get a 1/1 elemental. That's already a pretty good Enchantress payoff. But also, whenever an artifact you control enters, you can sack a creature to get a 3/2. Heartsuit, I mentioned, puts a bunch of artifacts and enchantments into play. We don't really have another deck that plays a lot of artifacts and a lot of enchantments. But there's plenty of decent enchantments, at least, in Revolution. So it could certainly happen, and a lot of ways to make artifact tokens. Fabricated Anomaly is, I think, the best support for either of these cards because it's an enchantment that makes an artifact. Creation Mythos is a weird card. 2 white for enchantment. When it enters, you search for an artifact and put it into your hand. And the first artifact spell you cast each turn costs 1 less for each enchantment you control. So I'd need to control probably 2 other enchantments before I was interested in this, which is not a thing that you do in a ton of decks. But I don't know, I could imagine playing this in like a white-green enchantment deck, or maybe a white-blue enchantment deck. I don't know. This one's kind of sketchy, but it's a tutor and it discounts things, and they're both card abilities that inherently scare me. We're getting to the end of the road because we're talking about the walls. Now, there's a bunch of walls in this set, and I love walls. I love that we have a wall theme. Unfortunately, all the wall payoffs are uncommon, and most of them are not that great. Like, in canon, DMU had the 4 mana wall, the 1/4, that whenever it entered, you got a 1/1 flyer for each wall you controlled, and whenever another wall you control entered, you got a 1/1 flyer. This set, the uncommon wall, I mean, you're seeing them here. Carousel Lay Tower pings them for 1 whenever you play a wall. Lacufe Lay Tower can make your walls able to attack, but it costs 2 mana per wall. And Deer Lay Tower can make a land into an XX, where X the number of walls you control, but doesn't give an evasion or anything. Ulfin Lay Tower makes you a 1/1, just like the DMU card, but it costs 6 mana. Yeah, the wall payoffs are not impressing me. There's the rare land Prismatic Lay Spire, which can cast any of your walls, and for 3 mana, if you control 3 more, it can win you the game on your next upkeep. You've got 7 or more differently named creatures with Defender. This seems more meme than dream to me, but it is funny. Oh, right, there's some novel little combos in this deck. Bell Hacker combo in Eternal? Well, we got it in Standard now. Now, Nether Ponderings, I've met Keening Bell Tower, and you, sir, are no Keening Bell Tower, but it does go infinite with a leveled up life hacker, which just might be enough. I mean, Nether Ponderings, it's no Bell Tower, but you can certainly draw a lot of cards in a lot of different decks in this format, so it's not that bad of a card. It's only like medium bad. And then, it does go infinite with Life Hacker, and Life Hacker is a pretty playable card, and it's only in mono black here. Annoyingly, Nether Ponderings does not have an activated ability, unlike Keening Bell Tower, so you can't find the contest coordinator. There's a polymorph in this set called Divine Repurposing. You exile a creature, its controller reveals cards and get a creature card, put it on the battlefield and shuffles, but then you end the turn. Now we do have a lot of Raise the Alarms. You could play like a white-red Raise the Alarms aggro deck that just plays only a couple actual creatures main, and then uses this polymorph to get them. It even has flashbacks. You get another one for all that's worth. The trouble is, end the turn means you can't get anything that has an enter trigger. You can't get privilege escalation. You can't get undefined behavior. You've got to get the second stringers. You got to get Warden of Skies. Boy, Warden of Skies is such a sad card. It's not very good. You could get Resource Inversion and get tons of mana, I guess. I don't see a ton of great creatures to get with this, unfortunately. Although it's a very good polymorph if we ever do get a creature that's very powerful that has a static ability. Okay, now we're actually getting close to the end. Life gain. Now, annoyingly, a lot of the Blightstalker is a card I talked about before. That's just a generically good card that can incidentally gain you life. That's pretty nice. I mentioned Sunsower. These kind of Soul Warden effects are usually the backbone of life gain decks. The actual life gain payoffs, a lot of them care about having more life than your starting life total, which is not really the thing I want to build around. Because what if you don't? What if your opponent's like attacking you? If you have more life than your starting life total, things are probably going well. In terms of life gain payoffs, Halo Tracer can draw you a card each turn if you have more life than your opponent, or otherwise just gain you a lot of life, as long as you're gaining life. That's a pretty reasonable life gain payoff, although not like knocking my socks off. Aura left the Sun Shard, the 2-mana 1/3 of flying and lifelink in green white, and on your end step you can pay mana equal to or less the amount of life you gain this turn. So if this is attacking, that's at least one, and you could easily gain more off something like a rejuvenation session to get that many 1/1s of flying and they can't block. This life gain deck seems a little slow, so I do really wish those tokens could block. Honestly, the best life gain payoffs in the format is probably Life Hacker, but the problem is Life Hacker is black and also pretty self-sufficient. So I'm not convinced by the life gain payoff here, especially since we just lost a bunch of our life gain payoffs with Muldoon. And that is the end of my review. Thank you all for coming. I am super excited about this set. If you couldn't tell, it's like Errors in the Weft too, and I loved Errors in the Weft the first time. Um, uh, Long live Revolution Custom Standard. Congratulations on Scribble on not just Scribble's first set in Revolution Custom Standard, but also Scribble's first Renegade promo of any kind, as far as I can tell. Scribble's a great curator. I always appreciate Scribble's commitment to reining in complexity creep. Really an aesthetic that I share. See you in the Revolution Discord, and good night.